It's an interesting thing when you start to think about floods in general, and especially in early humanity and early civilization, what kind of impact that would have on their stories and the things that they would pass on. How important it would be to tell them, you need to be ready. You need to have a plan.
Yes.
You don't know when this is going to happen. You don't have a big warning. It's not like a storm that rolls through. It can happen at any moment. You have to have a plan, and if you have the right plan, it can keep your family safe.
The thing that's fascinating with Göbekli Tepe is it also has a story, and it's etched on these megalithic structures,
mm-hmm.
and some of the scholars that are studying it believe that what it's describing is some kind of, impact that created just devastation. Because then the guy that first discovered Göbekli Tepe, a German guy, I forget his name, but he said it looks like there's just so much evidence that suggests that they purposefully buried the site in order to preserve it.
That's weird.
So that people could find it again.
But wouldn't it be interesting if back in that era, if something of catastrophe like that happened, who caused it?
Right.
God.
Yeah.
So then you begin to say, well, these natural disasters are acts of God, and God's the great magician. We don't know why it rains or why things happen, but a big storm like this, there's got to be a reason for something like this happening.
Well, isn't it according to our insurance still that there's certain acts of God that...
Yeah, we still call them acts of God in insurance. Yeah. Hurricanes, tornadoes, big high winds, floods.
I don't think we're quite as far away from those times as maybe we would like to believe.
Yeah, but I think back then they would say there had to be a reason for this happening. And you can go back and you start dissecting this and even come from that angle and said, well, what would be a reason that just the whole area would be flooded? Well, it must have been such moral depravity is what we think. And the only one who really survived was this guy who was crazy enough to build this yacht the size of the one in Kentucky.
This righteous guy that walked with God.
That's right. And he's the one guy, and his family all survive. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting that they took 2 of each species, but they took 3 worms. And it shows a picture of fishing off the side of the boat with that extra worm. I mean, all these comics.
That was his first sacrifice. Noah's first sacrifice.
Oh my gosh.
Sacrificial worm.
I do think that these stories, though, if you look at how people came to start to sacrifice, and that was something that we talked about in Cain and Abel, looking toward the future and being able to give something up today for something tomorrow. But I think there's also something that comes quickly after this in the story of human development that is look to the future and be ready for the worst thing that could possibly happen.
Yeah.
Set your sights on what catastrophe may come and be prepared for that.
Well, I think Peterson would say, and I heard him say this recently, like the last 24 hours, said, if you aim your life toward the highest possible good, and if you are walking faithfully with God, that's probably what you're doing. So even when the storm comes, you're prepared. Your whole point in life is not to live my life prepared. My point in life is for me to live my life the way it should be lived, honoring others and walking with God the best I know how, aiming toward being the best possible person that I can be. And then when that happens, and you jump to the New Testament and said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So basically you seek first this kingdom of righteousness, and the next thing you know, you have an ark in your yard when the storm comes. Yeah. Or you have some stability in unstable places. And I think that's part of the theme of the story that's so glossed over. And there are many ties from this story to the New Testament. Why worry about the lilies of the field? They neither toil nor spin. Well, if you're living your life toward the highest possible good and walking with God, then that is not your primary concern. Your primary concern is the greater things in life, being honest and truthful and making a difference in the world. And that comes back to even a teaching I grew up with in early Christianity was, for me, in my early Christianity, was following the teachings of Jesus. We used to use the word Christ-like. I want to be like Jesus. I want to live the way he did. Mm-hmm. It's not that I want to ultimately benefit off everyone else around me, which is maybe a capitalistic point of view, but it's not a distorted capitalistic point of view, but it's simply saying I want to live a life that's true, that's honorable, the best I know, that helps people, and the golden rule can come in there. I will live and treat others the way I think the best possible good of me should do.
Yeah.
Not that it's reciprocal, but it will be. The most generous people in life who live lives of generosity, it seems like they keep having their resources are plentiful. The more they give away, the more it seems to come to them. So I think there's certain principles here that definitely tie back to Noah. At least he sets the standard for what could be in that area.
Yeah.
About living a better life.
Yeah. And these guys that have shown up, particularly 500 years prior to Jesus, it's kind of like a weird religious revolution that occurred in that period of human history. So guys like the Buddha and other teachers, Confucius,
Correct.
They all show up at around the same time, and they all basically the morality stuff it parallels the morality of Jesus. I would say that Jesus is more refined and more brilliant, and I can prove that.
And I'm certain about that.
I'm not biased. But anyway, the point is this. What all these guys had in common is that they spent a lot of time contemplating reality for what it is. Mm-hmm. And so these guys, the men or women both that wrote this story down or that began the oral tradition, they looked at reality for what it was. They saw that there is this repeated cycle wherein you have chaos and you have order. And the best way to deal with that chaos is exactly what you were saying, is to aim at the highest good. But knowing what that highest good is comes from contemplating reality for what it is.
Ooh. Mm-hmm. That's well said.
No, I agree. I was talking to Rita a little while before you came in, Brad, and we were discussing a variety of things about, you can spend your life kind of defending what you believe and all the doctrinal positions that you want to, or you can spend your life dismantling those, or you can proclaim this higher good way to live your life. Yes. And proclaim the good things. And sometimes you just proclaim them because I don't think people really want to live their lives just analyzing all the details of the ancient Hebrew or those kinds of things, but they really want to know, what does this mean to me today? And how can I be a better version of myself? And how can I aim higher, live greater? And I love, I'll refer back to the prophet Jordan Peterson. So, where he said, even if you just live your life 0.1% better, if you're challenging people, live your life 0.1% better today, and you strive to do that, then, you make an improvement on humanity and on yourself. And as it continues to grow, you continue to grow, and you become a better person. And maybe someday, maybe not even as an ultimate goal, but in that process, then I would define, guess what? I think you then become Noah, because when you're doing that, you're walking with God.
Yes.
Trying to aspire to something greater than you are. It's not that you get there, but you get there as you work this process. So it's this process of becoming, not necessarily arriving.
Yeah, I like that. The process of becoming.
Yeah. Well, it's a weird thing to call ourselves beings when we're never really in a static state, it seems. We're constantly losing cells and, dying little bits at a time and then being reborn. So we're always in this process of becoming.
That's why you keep seeing that cycle too.
So we're human becoming.
Death and rebirth.
Right.
Death and rebirth.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Well, that was good. Hey, look, something we all agreed on.
Well, that's
is that the goal?
And we ended silent. What happened? Oh man. I really love this story though, I got to tell you. And I love the part that you're bringing up about walking with God and aiming at the highest good. And I don't want to necessarily jump to a bunch of other stories while doing this, but the story of Enoch did jump into my mind, that you have this man who walks with God, because all throughout the biblical stories you see these people that are walking with God. The righteous ones walk with God and they spend time with God. And then you have Enoch, and he's taken up to be with God.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a unique story. Mm-hmm. And you were just saying, it's not that you ever necessarily get there. It's that this continual walk isn't that you ever end up right there in that perfect space. Then you got this story of Enoch that just jumps out and says, but he walked with God so closely that God brought him straight to him.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? Do you have any thoughts on Or am I just taking this down a weird
No,
trail?
I think that's a compliment to Enoch's life, and I don't really know much about him. I don't think we get a lot about Enoch, just that he walked with God and he's taken up to be with God. I think it's, for me, I'd play a little more contrast with Cain when we just came out of that Cain is a guy who didn't choose to be his best self. He looked down, he was disturbed, he was anxious and frustrated, and I don't think he was walking with God in what he was doing. He was walking toward his own missing the mark and his own selfish ambitions. And why do you rise your countenance so long? If you just do what's right, if you just look toward your higher good, you'll be fine. And he was angry, and he killed his brother, and he followed down that destruction path that could be any of our paths, as we understand. But I think the aspiration then follows back even after the Cain and Abel story. You come right back into Noah, and he walked with God, and you see the possibility of this being there despite Cain.
And that's cool because that connects Noah to the ancestor Enoch by repeating that, and he
Agreed.
walked with God. I think one of the significant things about Enoch being taken up is that you can, as a human being, reach a place of awareness that enables you to transcend the cyclical nature of order and chaos and the suffering of the world, that kind of thing.
It was almost like a precursor to the afterlife, because they didn't have, there wasn't much talk or thought in the afterlife in these early stories, but all of a sudden Enoch just goes and kind of lives wherever God lives.
Yeah, it's like a union is achieved there. For the Hebrew mind, it's like a Buddhist would call that nirvana. Mm-hmm. The union with the ultimate consciousness.
And what would a Jewish person call it?
A Kabbalist would say...
Kabbalist. Let's use another word besides Kabbalist. Since nobody knows what that means, define it for us.
I did last time, didn't I?
I know, but this is not last week.
Jewish mystic.
Mysticism.
It's better to use terms like Jewish mysticism. I'm a PhD in Kabbalist. I go, where in the heck did that come from? I never heard this before. And if I haven't heard it, let me tell you, 99.9% of people have no idea what you're saying.
Everyone knows what you're talking about, Brett.
A Kabbalist, I thought it was like somebody who made shoes or something.
I think that's a cobblerist.
That's a cobblerist, yeah.
Yes,
I knew it was something close.
It's a different thing.
It is. They're very similar.
Yeah.
Sorry, Brett. I just had to jump on that.
No, that's good. And even the word mystic, what is that?
Right.
People get all this weird ideas about mystic, but that's just somebody that contemplates reality for what it is. That's really what at least somebody that contemplates reality.
At least in how you're using it.
Yes, and
most
the guys that I say are actually qualified mystics.
So
that's what they do.
I do think while we're talking about that with the whole Enoch thing, and then to let it go for a second, but I think that it is interesting that you have this guy that he keeps following kind of the Noah thing, and it works out.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's almost a show like this doesn't always end the same way. This could, at any moment, you could be the one that's taken up. Don't think that it all just ends in the process.
Right.
That there's something else.
That's what I was going to say.
It doesn't happen all the time.
So let me.
That's what the Jewish mystic says.
Which is the feeling I got as a little kid listening to that story, was like, man, I wonder if there's going to ever be another Enoch. I wonder if there's ever going to be another person that'll be.
His name's Elijah.
Well, now we're getting way off course.
Let me circle back to Noah, if that's okay.
That's all right. Yeah.
So we're in the world of Noah for just a minute, and one of the things interesting that human nature, it seems, is always says human beings are the only creation to have conscious deceit and malevolence.
Who said that?
That's Jordan Peterson.
You've been listening to a lot of Jordan Peterson.
I know.
I'm real proud of you.
I'm inspired by my son, so I'm listening to a lot of Jordan. But if humans are the only creation that have conscious deceit or malevolence, and you see this really exacerbated or just to a high level in this story, to where he said, the deceit and the malevolence is so great that I don't think I can fix this mentality. It's better to start again with somebody who is upright and honest, and at least shows even this is not a little story, but shows that if you live that way, the demise is probably there for you. You won't survive it. But if you want to live a way that survives, then seek the higher good in your life. And I think we can jump from there to the teachings of Jesus easily, and show the humility and the sense of even sacrificing his life for benevolence, for humanity. Now, I need to say it the way I want to, but I will
Sure.
later. But I think he offered himself to stand for the truth, realizing that, hey, I'm going to stand up for what I really believe in, that I'm speaking honest, I'm seeking the highest good I can in life, and no matter what happens to me, I'm still going to follow this teaching wherever it leads. And he was with God. I think ultimately that's the final end of that story too.
So my question would be, what does it mean to walk with God?
I think it's to live according to the highest good that you can in your life. And I think if we want to find patterns for that, we could then go back to the teaching of Jesus, Sermon on the Mount, and those kind of teachings. I think that when you aim toward the highest part of who you can be, being the best person that you can be, I think that then you're walking with God. And I think that as you do that, it changes the way you live. For me, I want to live. I used to say I want to live a Christ-like life. That means I want to follow the teachings of Jesus. I want to be because I think he followed the highest good, and as I follow him, I find myself following the highest good as well.
That's pretty. Hey, Rita, go ahead and step up to the mic.
Hi, everyone. Does that come naturally to people?
To follow the teachings of Jesus, not just one of them.
No.
Does that come naturally to people?
Yes
That's
and
the
no.
question.
Let's answer that very specifically, yes and no.
Yeah.
I know that's a good question. I think that the natural tendency for people is to take care of themselves, and as we become more enlightened of what that means, we choose to be the best version of who we can be. Yeah. We enter infancy, we grow up into this. It's not something that just naturally comes. I think it's something that's developed intellectually and also spiritually. We find we can achieve our higher good through the breath of God being breathed into us, and the living part of us, an understanding and awareness of who we are in the world and how we can make the world better.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think what happens is you start off being this thing that just desires everything. You're like pure desire.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're demanding it. And then as you grow, you become more and more aware of the need for balancing that, and then eventually even maturing into someone that can actually give.
But let me tag onto that. I think, but as you are young and you want all that stuff, there's a sense of innocence too.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's evil when you're an innocent child saying, I want my way. It's not like, oh, look at the devil in him, or look, you can see that carnal nature in that kid. I think that there's something that as we grow up and it's innocent at that point. And when it becomes deliberate is when we make choices to where we choose to do things that are deceitful. And when we make those choices, not accidents that happen, we make choices to be malevolent and deceitful and to tell untruth and to lie to people. And I think when we do that, we're not working in our best good. So this comes back to something I know you like, Ryan, is speak truthfully. Speak from your heart truthfully and try to live according to that truth. And I think you'll find a higher plane.
Well, I think that goes back to even the first Genesis account. God speaks and it was good. And that there's something about the spoken word. This is again a Peterson concept. The problem is Peterson's done so much in this area. He has so many hours of lecture that it's hard to not listen to it.
He's one of few that has spent so much time. Few from his field that have spent so much time looking at those stories specifically.
I'm not trying to just repeat everything that I've heard him say, but I think there's a lot of good stuff there. And I think that in the early times, you see God speaking, and it was good, and the word there that was used was logos, and that truthful speech acted out brings about good. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a way to create something that isn't good, and the way that you do that is maybe by speaking in a way that's not truthful, and that you can still create things, but they're only good when the speech is truthful. And I think that's true in life in general. If you lie, you tell somebody to take a right when they should take a left to get to your house, well, that may create some time spent, and it may create an event for them, but it's not going to be the event that they signed up for. And so we do have a tendency to create things that are not as beneficial or not as good when we don't speak truthfully.
I agree.
And I think that speaking, using the word speech all the time, I think that throws people. because the value, the reason that there's so much focus on speech is because of the value that speech has had for human beings. Why it's one of the main reasons, our ability to communicate is one of the main reasons that we've thrived in the world versus other species. And so it becomes something that is, sacramentalized.
Sure.
But logos, even the word logos can be interpreted as the thought of God too. So it's even thinking that it's not in line with the reality of things. So that's like a lie. It's a self-lie, but
right.
it's formed in your thinking too. But I wanted to get back to something because I think this is really important to understand. And now it just flew right out of my head. Tell to get old.
Well, while you're thinking through that, let me jump in.
Okay.
I think that as we look at this story again, you see that when the masses head towards social destruction, and when the masses choose to live in a way that's not truthful, and they're corrupt in their structure, the inevitability is the flood, the chaos will come.
Yes.
And that will wipe that out, because that's what chaos does. It destroys this. And if there's going to be order or logos in that, I think it's going to be a person who walks uprightly and who walks faithfully, who walks with God in the garden, is a person who's understand more of the order, speaking truthfully, and living a life of legacy to where his family's affected, and those who choose otherwise will find themselves in deep water, so to speak.
Yes. That's where that story starts off.
So do you feel like there's been, I don't know, I'm kind of playing this out as I say it, but do you feel like there's been a bit of a dismissal of the moral, of being moral today in today's culture?
Yes.
That there's not as much of an emphasis on being ethical or moral just for the sake of being ethical or moral?
Yes. And you can find that argument from guys, atheists like Sam Harris, that this is problematic for our society. And you can find it from theologians.
Yeah.
And they're both right. Yeah, I think that this is a real problem in the postmodern era. Postmodern thinking is that everything is relative, and that simply can't be true, that everything is relative.
Yeah. There
has to be a basis for something. This is even an argument among Buddhists.
Yeah.
That, one school says that there is nothing that is not relative, and in the process they make an absolute.
Right.
That's their absolute.
Yeah.
And a sociologist, Peter Berger, would tag onto that and say it's the process of objectifying. So, there's this objectification. It's not just about the social unit, but somehow you objectify and you look up above. And I'm not saying how that's created or anything. I don't want to get into that, but somehow there's these truths are outside of humanity. They're outside of society. They really determine the way society lives and the structure of society. And in this story, it's like they really were out of bounds.
Yes.
And they were so imploding.
They lost their moral compass.
And so there's a do-over. But now if you want to play this story on out, I'm going to do this quickly, but it goes on down, and to read the rest of the story of Noah is just like, what is this about? There's so many different things that go on toward the end, where they come back and all the different things that happen. If you want to read that, you can read it yourself. It's several chapters long, but it's worthy of perusing it. But it's not meant to be literal.
No.
It's a great story that proclaims great truths about humanity and walking with God faithfully, the consequences of choosing deceit and destruction, or choosing a life of order and benefit and
preparedness and proper
and
sacrifice.
Being ready.
I remembered what it was.
Go for it.
So Rita asked the question: does this come naturally? Following the walking with God, does it come naturally? And we said yes and no. And I realized why we said that. Yes, in the sense that it seems to be inevitable, that eventually it may be a really rough ride. It may be a hellish ride, but eventually the conscious being arrives at that understanding that they need to aim for the highest good. They need to walk with God.
Right.
Okay. And no, because the teachings of Jesus are right in the face of what would seem intuitive, right? It's very counterintuitive. Love your enemy is the best example, that comes right to mind. What do you mean, love my enemy?
Yeah.
Even Jewish mystics struggle with that to this day. They still are, who is my friend? Love your friend. they say.
That's
Well,
interesting.
wait a minute. How does that fix things if you're not willing to love your enemy? You see?
Yeah.
So, yeah, very counterintuitive stuff that Jesus brought to the table.
Yeah. And I think we're all still struggling with a lot of that.
Yeah, I agree. But that's the reason why we're here, to try to find that inspiration/aspiration to be people who truly try to walk with God and live the highest best good.
Yep.
So I think it's fair.
We could keep going. It's up to you guys. You want to keep going, or you want to clock out?
I think it's time to clock out.
We had a lot of conversation before this started. So,
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. This has been week 4 of Hello World, and we'll be back next week.